When you think about bees, most of us think about that irritating buzzing noise or perhaps being stung, but they're about a lot more than that. Did you know, a very interesting fact, that bees provide 1 in every 3 bites of South African food. In fact, you can call them the buzzing engineers supporting South Africa's food chain. But the sad news is that bee populations around the globe are being threatened. That's why we have Mike Allsop, expert here, who's a senior researcher at the Agricultural Research Council, to join us and tell us a bit more about the importance of bees to our food security. Mike, good to have you here.
Good morning, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about exactly what role honeybees play in our agricultural circle of life, if you will.
Well, as you say, they provide these days approximately 1/3, it's probably closer to 40% these days in terms of agricultural food production. That's by virtue of their commercial pollination. When agriculture has changed, it's no longer small-scale agriculture, it's huge monoculture crops, and if you can imagine, if you've got 50 hectares of plums, that's many millions of flowers, and they all flower within a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. And you've got no natural vegetation or no natural pollinators around. So if you actually want those flowers to be pollinated, you actually have to bring in the pollinators. So you actually introduce commercial honeybees. You pick up the phone, the farmer picks up the phone, phones the beekeepers, orders 500 or 1,000 colonies of bees, pays money for that. The bees get moved in, they pollinate all those, in this case, plums, and then they move out again.
Yeah.
And as human diet has changed, we no longer depend on the so-called staple diets. People these days like fruits and nuts and berries and all those types of things, and they like them 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And increasingly, all these crops actually need to be pollinated by some pollinator, and 95 to 99% of all commercial pollination in the world is done by one single species, which is the honeybee.
Yeah. And so how is our honeybee population faring, especially against climate change?
Our honeybee population, compared to that in the United States and Europe, seems to be reasonably okay. But we do have some stress levels. Globally, bee populations are under stress from pollution, from pesticides, from pests and diseases, and in particular from there just not being enough space. As the pollination demands around the world increase, you obviously have to keep more and more bees. Mm-hmm. And to keep those bees, you need natural habitat and natural space to keep them. And as the human population grows, we are running out of space to keep the numbers of colonies alive that we need to pollinate our crops.
Yeah.
And already in South Africa, we are right up at that tipping point where at the moment, we have enough bees to actually pollinate our commercial crops. But if you speak to most commercial beekeepers in South Africa now, they are very concerned that within a year or two, we will not have enough bees to pollinate the blueberries and the raspberries and the onions that we currently produce.
Are these a particular kind of bee that you're talking about? Because I know that there's one sort of bee called the scutellata and another one called the capensis, but then there's the African killer bee. Help me make sense of these.
Honeybees, there are the different species of honeybee, but in terms of the commercial bee, we're just talking about one single species, Apis mellifera, but there are different variants or races or subspecies around the world. So there are European subspecies. In South Africa, we have 2 subspecies. In the Cape, we have the Cape honeybee, and in the rest of Central Africa, we have another species, the African honeybee, which is scutellata. Mm-hmm. And from a management point of view, from a pollination point of view, you're talking any of the bees that are in your particular environment.
All right. And so, okay, quickly, just how can people help support these initiatives that help keep the local bee communities going?
We really need to develop and sustain our bee population and your local bee population. To do that, you really need to buy local honey. If you have farmland available, or if you in municipalities or commercial, if you have access to land, you need to allow access to commercial beekeepers so that they can utilize that forage. But in particular, we really need to rebuild and sustain the forage, what I call the chocolate cake, the amount of forage available in regions of South Africa like the Western Cape, but in South Africa as a whole. Mm-hmm. Because unless we actually produce the forage, the trees, the natural habitat, and the commercial land for bees, we will not be able to keep the populations that we need
Support our
exercise
food
our
security,
pollination. Yeah.
Well, thank you
Food
very much,
security.
Mike, for joining us this morning. We really do appreciate it. That is Mike Allsop, the senior researcher at the Agricultural Research Council, telling us about the importance of honeybees to our food security here in South Africa. Definitely something for us all to think about. Well, right now, let's find out what else is coming up on your Feel Good Breakfast show.